Good morning. I am a United States Air Force intelligence weapons officer with the Utah Air National Guard. I have been interested in the rise of China and Chinese military threat systems for a decade. Recently, there has been an increased interest in the rising threat the People's Republic of China and Chinese Communist Party pose to the United States of America. This presentation is a 10-minute executive summary highlighting the main points of the full 60-minute brief titled China Outcompeting the United States, where we'll discuss China's growing capability to challenge the United States of America and the existing world order. This presentation is current as of 13 March 2023 with a security designation of Unclassified. Let's take a look at the desired learning objectives for this briefing. Next slide. The audience should gain an understanding of the main points from the full 60-minute brief to include why China is so aggressively striving to challenge the United States, the Chinese government's official goals, and thirdly, recognition that the Chinese military capabilities may already be surpassing the United States military. Now let's look at the problem this brief is attempting to address. Is the party over for the United States? The United States is no longer the world's only uncontested superpower. China is aggressively striving to shape and overtake the United States and Western way of life by the year 2049, and America needs to start acting as such. The problem is that United States citizens, United States government officials, and United States service members alike are largely unaware of China's aggressive actions to challenge the United States right now over the future of the world. Let's look at why the Chinese government is becoming more aggressive. Next slide. Over the last 70 years, China greatly benefited from the existing world order. China does not wish to break the world order. They wish to shape it in order for them to get the world order to favor China's interests. But why doesn't China just accept the Western-led world order as it is? In Beijing's view, a US-led world in which China is a second-tier power is not the historical norm, but a profoundly galling exception. To China, that world order was created after World War II at the tail end of China's century of humiliation, in which a divided China was plundered by rapacious Western powers. The Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party's mandate is to set history aright by returning China to the top of the heap. President Xi Jinping of China said in 2014, quote, "Since the Opium Wars of the 1840s, the Chinese people have long cherished a dream of realizing a great national rejuvenation," end of quote, as was first made popular in 1915 by Shen Dushou. President Xi went on to say, quote, "Under Chinese Communist Party rule, China will never again tolerate being bullied by any nation, and that the East is rising and the West is declining," end of quote. At the root of comments like these is a deeply held belief in Chinese primacy as the natural order of things. Now let's take a look at the official goals of the Chinese government. Next slide. Look down at the first red arrow on the left side of the slide. By the year 2049, which is the 100th year anniversary of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese government aims to lead the world in terms of, quote, composite national strength and international influence, end of quote. By composite national strength, China implies they wish to be the world leader economically, culturally, militarily, diplomatically, and informationally. And by 2050, China wishes to become a nation with pioneering global influence and to build a community of common destiny, while possessing the second largest military in the world. In other words, China seeks to replace the United States as the top dog, knock America off its perch, and reorder the world so it better suits China's interests and values. Next slide. If China's aggressive goals aren't enough to concern you, in the year 2019, the most influential and authoritative newspaper in China, called The People's Daily, announced, quote, "The People's War Against America," end of quote. And in November of 2022, President Xi created a war cabinet telling them, quote, "Prepare to undergo high winds and waves, and even for the stormy seas of a major test," end of quote. Until China's military is ready to fight, what strategy has China been employing against the United States to work toward these aggressive national goals? Next slide. For many years now, China's strategy against the United States has been what China calls, quote, comprehensive national power, end of quote. China has leveraged every possible means of national power and influence while avoiding direct military action with the United States. It follows the Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu's wisdom of, quote, weaker forces can defeat stronger forces through deception and cunning, end of quote. Let's take a look at some recent examples. In January of 2023, a Chinese weather satellite employed a green laser against the United States state of Hawaii. Worst case, a LiDAR mapping laser can assist precise targeting of hypersonic glide vehicle warheads carried by air-launched ballistic missiles launched by Chinese H-6N bombers that can be refueled in order to reach Hawaii. And two, and of course, everyone is aware of the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down recently. Let's look at another secret weapon China is using to hurt the United States. Next slide. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of Americans under 50. Tiny amounts of fentanyl are lethal, and there are 162 overdoses every day in America. So how does China do it? Chinese labs partner with Mexican drug cartels to provide the Chinese government plausible deniability. Cryptocurrency is used to purchase the precursor ingredients directly from Chinese labs. An open U.S.-Mexican border and porous U.S.-Canadian border facilitate the wide distribution throughout the United States. I recently spoke with a Salt Lake City narcotics officer and without telling him who I was, asked him what was the number one problem he was dealing with in Utah. He immediately responded, quote, fentanyl coming through Canada from China, end of quote. But China has found other ways to take advantage of the addictive tendencies of Americans. Next slide. China views the information domain as a domain of war, similar to air, land, and space. One highly effective method China can collect information on U.S. citizens is through the Chinese smartphone app TikTok. In fact, TikTok has become very addictive to U.S. children and has been likened as digital fentanyl. Chinese government intelligence and cyber laws compel Chinese companies to share their data with the Chinese government. China collects your IP address, your location, device ID, metadata, and your biometric identifiers. The data China gathers is then used to build artificial intelligence. That artificial intelligence can then be used to push tailored and harmful digital content onto the smartphones of you and your children, influencing you to destabilize the United States with racism riots, eating disorders, political division, drug use, self-harm, and even suicide. Now let's look at other ways China steals from the United States. Recall earlier in this brief the Made in China program as one of their national goals. By 2025, China would level itself with the world's most advanced technological powers. China seeks to accomplish this goal through unrestricted warfare and theft. In July of 2022, the FBI director said that, quote, China aims to ransack the intellectual property of Western companies so it can speed up its own industrial development and eventually dominate key industries. He warned that China is snooping on companies everywhere in the United States, from big cities to small towns, from Fortune 100s all the way down to startup companies. In January of 2023, according to the Department of Justice, Mr. Zhang, an engineer and U.S. citizen, hid confidential files stolen from his employer, General Electric, concerning new gas and steam turbine engine technology. He hid the information in the binary code of a digital photograph of a sunset. Considered to be worth millions, it was sent to his accomplice in China and would ultimately benefit the Chinese government as well as China-based companies and universities. Should Americans be concerned? Let's look at what some American kids think about China. In 2021, 50 fourth graders from an elementary school in Salt Lake City sent President Xi Jinping letters wishing him a happy Chinese New Year. President Xi Jinping responded with a letter to the Utah school children, and a subsequent video was produced by the school children and sent to the Chinese president. The Utah school children referred to China's president as, quote, Grandpa Xi, and they said, "We love China, stay strong China." Will rising generations of Americans see the threat China poses to United States interests? On the following slides, we'll explore a more dangerous aspect of China's rapid growth, the Chinese military. Next slide. What we see today with China is the largest, most rapid peacetime military buildup and military modernization campaign our world has seen in 100 years. The following slides will only superficially introduce you to the threat China's modern military poses to the United States of America. Next slide. China's military has increased its hard power by not only increasing the budget, the size, and sheer numbers of its armed forces, but also by its simultaneous modernization in all kinetic domains of war: ground, air, sea, space, and cyberspace. Let's look at an example. The United States once thought China only had ambitions to protect its own homeland and be a manufacturing hub for the global economy. However, China has stolen and/or modernized every form of air power employed by the United States. For example, the introduction of China's new heavy-lift turbofan-powered transport aircraft called the Y-20 demonstrates that China intends to be able to move its military regionally and possibly, and most likely, around the world. Additionally, an air refueling variant of the Y-20 called the Y-20U will enable Chinese fighter jets and bomber aircraft to fly much further from the homeland than in years past. Now let's look at how fast China's new military has grown. On this slide, we can see that in the year 1999, China had a much smaller military relative to the United States forces that were deployed to the Indo-Pacific theater. The United States far outnumbered China in space capabilities, advanced fighter aircraft, bomber aircraft, large naval capability, and nuclear submarines. All United States bases in the entire theater were not within range of enemy weapon systems. The People's Liberation Army could only project power from mainland China out to the first island chain. But most importantly, the entire Indo-Pacific theater was free and open for global trade. Now let's fast forward 25 years while the United States was fighting a 20-year war in the Middle East. United States Pacific Air Force projects that by the year 2025, China will outnumber United States capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region and in all domains of war. Even with the addition of our allies' militaries, China will have the ability to project military power throughout the entire region. All U.S. bases are now under constant potential threat of attack. This military posture by China is called anti-axis area denial, or A2AD, because its intent is to push the United States military out of the Indo-Pacific region. If the United States presence were to decline, it is assessed that the Indo-Pacific region would no longer remain free and open for global trade, which would have a disastrous impact on the global economy. But surely the United States Navy will come to the rescue. Next slide. As if that wasn't bad enough, the United States can no longer rely upon sea superiority in the Indo-Pacific theater. China has developed a carrier killer missile or missiles that can target U.S. aircraft carriers. For example, the DF-26B is an intermediate-range anti-ship high hypersonic ballistic missile thought to have no known defense and is either conventional or nuclear armed. It has a range to hit bases or slow-moving ships like aircraft carriers out to a range of 2,485 nautical miles and strike U.S. military facilities as far away as Guam. But surely the United States Air Force will come to the rescue. Next slide. Sadly for the United States fighter pilot, the U.S. can no longer rely on air superiority. China's new advanced radar-guided, beyond visual range air-to-air missile is more capable than the United States AIM-120 AMRAAM, which has been the United States bread and butter for air superiority for the last 40 years. China's missile has longer maximum ranges that can target and kill U.S. fighter jets before the U.S. pilots can target and kill the Chinese jets. This advantage increases Chinese fighter survivability, which could quickly increase Chinese fighter jet force ratio during an air-to-air engagement, making it more likely that the United States fighter pilot might turn and run away. Let's see what a former U.S. president might have to say about all this. Next slide. Former U.S. President Ronald Reagan said it best, quote, "We maintain the peace through our strength. Weakness only invites aggression," end of quote. Deterrence is the action of discouraging an action or event through instilling doubt or fear of the consequences. Due to China's military modernization, China may be less likely to be deterred by the United States military and may become more aggressive in its use of force in the very near future. Next slide. In 2021 testimony before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, the commander of U.S. IndoPACOM, Admiral Philip Davidson, stated that, quote, "China is the greatest threat to global order and stability. The United States has lost the quantitative advantage, and our qualitative advantage was shrinking across several domains as the People's Liberation Army fields higher quality systems. The greatest danger for the United States in this competition is the erosion of conventional deterrence. A combat-credible conventional deterrent posture is necessary to prevent conflict and protect United States interests and assure our allies and partners in the region. Absent a convincing deterrent, the People's Republic of China will be emboldened to take action to undermine the rules-based international order and a free and open Indo-Pacific," end of quote. Next slide. Similar to Admiral Davidson, U.S. STRATCOM Commander Admiral Charles Richards said in November of 2022 that, quote, "Competitors like China are outcompeting the United States." He said, quote, "As I assess our level of deterrence against China, the ship is slowly sinking. It is sinking slowly, but it is sinking, as China is putting capability into the field faster than we are. We used to know how to move fast, and we have lost the art of that. The only advantage the United States has left is our undersea capability, meaning our submarines," end of quote. Next slide. In 2023, the Heritage Foundation conducted a review of U.S. military strength and produced a detailed report rating the overall strength of each military service. The report stated the U.S. Air Force as very weak due to problems with retention and pilot production, extraordinarily limited cockpit time, old aircraft with an average age of 32 years, the pace of new aircraft being too slow. The report stated that the U.S. Air Force will struggle in a conflict against a peer competitor. It also rated the United States Navy as weak due to the declining number of ships in the United States Navy's inventory and the importance the U.S. Navy will play in a conflict with China in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. Nuclear Force and U.S. Marine Corps were rated strong. Hoorah. Now let's transition to China's impressive economic growth and economic factors of the Indo-Pacific region. Next slide. Since 1990, the chart at the bottom left, the U.S. economy has grown 61%, whereas the Chinese economy has grown 536%. As recent as 2004, the chart at the top right, the gross domestic product of the U.S. economy dwarfed the Chinese economy. By 2014, the two nations' economies were equal, and by 2024, the Chinese economy will be significantly larger than the U.S. economy. China has used the capital resources from all this economic growth to build a modern fighting force to threaten the region. Let's see what the former commander of U.S. IndoPACOM said about all this. Next slide. Former commander of U.S. IndoPACOM, Admiral Davidson, went on to say, quote, "The U.S. and global economy are economically dependent upon the Indo-Pacific. Our nation's vision for the Indo-Pacific is for peace and prosperity and a free and open Indo-Pacific theater. 60% of the world's gross domestic product goes through the Indo-Pacific, more than 2/3 of global economic growth, and it is the #1 destination for U.S. foreign direct investment. The chart at the top right shows the top 10 manufacturing superpowers, 4 of which are in Asia. The chart at the bottom right shows the top 10 trading partners of the United States, 7 of which are in Asia. The U.S. and global economy will not remain strong. Let me rephrase that. The U.S. and global economy will weaken much faster if the United States allows a superior Chinese military to dominate and close down the Indo-Pacific theater. Now let's transition to China's rising influence throughout the world. This slide summarizes China's impressive worldwide expansion. It details U.S. security interests impacted by China's growing influence. For example, China has ambitions to establish up to 20 overseas military bases. Significant Chinese port investments could also one day be used to support an expanding Chinese military. It shows 149 countries already supporting China's One Belt, One Road initiative. For example, look at all the little red triangles just in the Caribbean, south of the United States. Up to 60 nations around the world, including Europe, have agreed to Chinese 5G infrastructure projects, despite the fact that China will gain access to all of their citizens' private electronic data. This slide also shows the number of countries hosting Chinese Confucius institutes, to include the United States, institutes which are a subtle means for China to spread its culture and beliefs and eclipse U.S. influence abroad. The red dotted lines show PLA Navy routes expanding around the world and no longer just limited off the coast of China. And the purple boxes show nations which China has recently convinced to stop officially recognizing the democratic nation of Taiwan. Now let's discuss if war between China and the United States will be inevitable. Next slide. An interesting 2012 study found that among 16 historical instances of an emerging power rivaling a ruling power, 12 of the 16 instances ended in war. So is war between China and US and the United States inevitable? That remains uncertain, but one would be mistaken to think that war is always the result of the ruling power being surpassed. Instead, war was much more likely to break out when the emerging power lashed out when its rapid rise changed to stagnation. The most dangerous trajectory in world politics is a long rise followed by the prospect of a sharp decline. And this is the stage we see being set with China today. A long rise economically, militarily, and internationally, but with the potential for stagnation due to food, energy, water, and population shortages that are on the horizon for China. Will China lash out at the United States militarily as its society starts to stagnate? Next slide. The audience should have gained an understanding of the main points from this brief, to include why China is aggressively striving to challenge the United States right now, the Chinese government's official goals, and recognition that the Chinese military capabilities may already be surpassing the U.S. military capabilities. It has been a pleasure sharing this briefing titled, quote, China Outcompeting the United States. This briefing's security designation is Unclassified. Thank you.